Today, we are going to examine how one of history's great military leaders made sure his men were fed and supplied. In the real world, Alexander the Great based his strategies and campaigns on his army's unique capabilities, and these were made possible by effective supply chain management. In the spirit of the saying, amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics, let's look at the campaigns of Alexander the Great. For those who think that his greatness was only due to his ability to dream up bold moves and cut a dashing figure in the saddle, think again. Alexander was a master of supply chain management, and he could not have succeeded otherwise. The authors from Greek and Roman times who recorded his deeds had little to say about something so apparently unglamorous as how he secured supplies for his army. Yet, from these same sources, many small details can be pieced together to show the overall supply chain picture and how Alexander managed it. A modern historian, Donald Ingalls, has investigated this topic in his book Alexander the Great and the Logistics of the Macedonian Army. Ingalls, Donald W. 1978, Alexander the Great and the Logistics of the Macedonian Army, Los Angeles, CA. University of California Press. He begins by pointing out that given the conditions and the technology that existed in Alexander's time, his strategy and tactics had to be very closely tied to his ability to get supplies and to run a lean, efficient organization. The only way to transport large amounts of material over long distances was by ocean-going ships or by barges on rivers and canals. Once away from rivers and seacoasts, an army had to be able to live off the land over which it traveled. Diminishing returns set in quickly when using pack animals and carts to haul supplies because the animals themselves had to eat and would soon consume all the food and water they were hauling unless they could graze along the way. Alexander's army was able to achieve its brilliant successes because it managed its supply chain so well. The army had a logistics structure that was fundamentally different from other armies of the time. In other armies, the number of support people and camp followers was often as large as the number of actual fighting soldiers, because armies traveled with huge numbers of carts and pack animals to carry their equipment and provisions, as well as the people needed to tend them. In the Macedonian army, the use of carts was minimal. Soldiers carried all of their gear on their backs except for their shields, which were too large to be practical to carry while marching. Shields were stored in supply depots set up along the routes the army traveled. This was made possible by the introduction of new weapons like the sarissa, a 16 to 18-foot long pike. This weapon required fewer carrying resources than the traditional Greek hoplite equipment of a large shield, a helmet with a horsehair crest, a sword at the hip, and a pair of long spears for thrusting and throwing. Soldiers outfitted with pikes instead of traditional weapons needed less stuff carried for them and thus placed fewer demands on the army's supply and logistics system. Another innovation that reduced the need for pack animals and carts was the Macedonian infantry phalanx formation. The phalanx was a shoulder-to-shoulder mass of tightly packed spearmen. Because the spears overlapped, each soldier was protected by the bodies of his comrades, and this close formation eliminated the need for large shields. Instead of the traditional hoplite-style helmets with their horsehair crests, soldiers wore simple leather hats to protect against blows and falling rocks. The phalanx formation also made it unnecessary for soldiers to carry swords, since their comrades in the close ranks would be hacked to pieces by sword-wielding enemy soldiers who got too close. All of these changes reduced the amount of equipment and supplies needed for the army and freed up soldiers to carry additional spears, javelins, and arrows for missile troops. Even without these innovations, though, the Macedonian army was smaller than other Greek armies, with just 30,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. It was composed entirely of professional soldiers, though, unlike most Greek armies, which were raised from the citizenry and included farmers, shopkeepers, and other non-professional soldiers. This professionalism was aided by the fact that soldiers were paid. Officers were paid more and received other benefits like clothing allowances and extra rations. But even common soldiers earned enough to make the annual military campaigns financially worthwhile, especially when compared to what they could earn back home. While the phalanx was the main fighting unit, there were some specialized troops whose equipment was carried for them by other soldiers. Companion cavalry were mounted and armored like traditional cavalry, but they used bows rather than swords and spears. Engineers and other specialists were also supported by other soldiers. Siege warfare was conducted by detachments that were led by officers with special experience in that field. Supply specialists also accompanied the army, but we don't know much about their role except that there was a clear chain of command and responsibility between the officers and the quartermasters who actually distributed supplies. All of this organization helped to keep the number of camp followers and supply personnel to a minimum. In the summer of 330 for BC, Alexander's army left its base at the port city of Piraeus near Athens and marched east. It crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, where it fought and won the Battle of the Granicus River. The army then moved south through Lydia and Phrygia, where they lived off the land, foraging for berries, fish, and fruits, and gathering wild greens to supplement their rations. They hunted wild animals and birds for food, too, and they killed or captured livestock to add to their meat supply. Captured enemy supplies were also added to the general pool. Grain was acquired primarily through tribute payments levied on local kings and satraps. In return for grain, Alexander usually gave gold and silver coins. However, when the value of grain was high, as was the case in 333 BC, gold was in short supply and the Macedonians weighed the grain they received. The army marched from the coast, moving along the Royal Road, a well-paved highway built by the Persians to facilitate communication and troop movements throughout their empire. It joined the Royal Road from the north near the city of Sardis and headed south, following the coast to Miletus. Here they met the Persians in the famous Battle of Issus. Alexander's victory at Issus gave him control of the entire Levant and western Anatolia. He established headquarters in Tyre, a city on the Mediterranean coast in modern Lebanon. From there, the army advanced into Egypt, where it stayed for almost a year. According to Plutarch, a Greek biographer from Roman times, the army kept moving during this whole period, never staying in one place for long. So far, so good. Military campaigns that last mere days or weeks can be supported by bringing supplies along, either by pack animal or by ship. But how did Alexander's army stay supplied for longer campaigns that sometimes lasted months? The answer, as we shall see next time, is something that even today's militaries struggle with: logistics. Alexander's campaign in Egypt was made possible by three main supply hubs. The first was Tyre, which served as headquarters for the entire campaign. The second was a port on the Nile where ships brought supplies up from the Persian Gulf, such as the grain grown in Babylonia and Elam, which was hauled overland to the Nile and shipped north to the third hub, Alexandria. Alexandria was founded by Alexander at the western entrance to the Nile Delta and served as the main base of operations. Supplies from across the Persian Empire flowed into this center, which had a harbor capable of handling hundreds of transports. These raw materials were then processed in Alexandria before being distributed throughout the army. Supplies from the sea and river were also delivered directly to units in the field by light transports, such as fast boats on the river and wagons on the roads. Although the army largely lived off the land, local officials provided grain stores, livestock, and other necessities from the cities and villages under their control. However, when the locals didn't have enough to meet the army's needs, they were given the option of paying tribute in gold instead. This worked well in regions with large cities and a lot of wealth, such as Egypt, but it didn't work so well in more thinly populated areas. In these places, local governors had to send for grain from Egypt to pay the army. Next time, we lines take a look at how some of history's greatest military leaders handled the challenge of feeding their men when campaigns lasted for months or even years. To get the most out of our upcoming episodes, be sure to subscribe and leave us a comment with your ideas for topics that we should cover in the future. Thanks for watching.